Eric Sigler is the head of DevOps at PagerDuty. How many folks here use PagerDuty? Wow, I'm really surprised. I expected half the room to raise their hand. Who here at least knows what PagerDuty is? Okay, that's better. So it's a tool I use professionally and have for a long time. If any of you have managed on-call rotations using spreadsheets, well, PagerDuty helps solve that problem with the software as a service platform. And they help ops teams be more effective managing on-call schedules and stuff like that. So Eric Sigler is the head of DevOps over at PagerDuty and also has spent 16 years in infrastructure and operations teams. Please join me in welcoming Eric. He's going to be talking about humans and compilers, not compilers, but he's going to be plugging in right now. I'm really excited to hear this talk. What is this thing here? How's it going, unicorn? So this unicorn is going to be hanging out with us today. So who here knows the unicorn thing with DevOps? Unicorns, horses? So like two people? The two people who flew here? So the whole idea about unicorns is companies and who do things differently. Big, large-scale distributed computing companies are unicorns. Well, the thing is, we can all be unicorns too, and that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about today. Do you have any unicorns over at PagerDuty there, Eric?
No, we haven't filed our S1 paperwork yet. So.
Well, thanks. Please join me again in welcoming Eric, and he's going to be kicking us off today.
Mic working? If I stand away from the computer. Hey, how you doing? See if we can. Oh, gee whiz. All right, cool. Better? Good morning, everyone. Yo, how's it going? I don't even see where the mic is now. All right, well, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. This is an interesting thing, isn't this? I think that the audience would love it if you would wander around and maybe take some photos with them. I think that's the thing, I think we need to go for maximum embarrassment here, don't you? Yeah, it's definitely. Plus, also, give it up for the unicorn. Indeed. Or do you need the stairs over here? Yeah. All right, good morning. Well, helps if I turn it on. Okay, so first up here, how many people have ever been in a code review or a pull request or something like that? How many people here have participated in something like that? How many people here have maybe had less than a perfect communication experience trying to indicate what you're thinking to the other human? Well, we do that a lot. And so I've been an operations engineer or a manager now for many, many years. And I've kind of noticed this odd pattern that happens where we try to formalize English or the language of your choice and then put in place structures around it. And we try to then treat humans as this terrible, buggy compiler of written or spoken documents. And we do this in a lot of different ways. Legal agreements, everybody totally agrees to this, right? And all the structures that go around that. And this is also the case with product specifications. And totally, everybody's going to move that card to the next Kanban column over, right? And all of the engineers that have to turn those product specifications into actual working software. And then sometimes even with things like runbooks for the operations side of the house. And this is as much as I'm legally allowed to show you of our internal runbooks. And even then, runbooks involve usually lots of different people wearing lots of different hats. And it turns out that even when you have all of this formalized structure in place, things still go boom. So this is the Mars Climate Observer from 1999. And it encountered Mars at an improperly low altitude, which is to say it went smacking into the face of Mars. And when NASA was doing the review of this, they described this as the systemic cause of the mishap as an organizational failure, with the proximate cause being the unchecked assumptions across different teams regarding using metric or imperial units. And so why is this? Well, I think there's a couple of different reasons going on. And the first reason is that your compiler has bugs, right? Whoever's managing this project of humans, they really have let the backlog just kind of go all out. And so I thought today I might go over a few of these issues and talk about what some of the might be underlying causes are, and then what some of the workarounds are that we can think about that you can take back to your own organizations. First though, like all good engineers, I want to try to figure this out. What's going on? Why do we actually have this bug in the first place? And it turns out that human beings have a massive amount of pattern matching hardware across all of the different parts of their physiology that we've been able to figure out so far, from your senses to the way that your eye perceives visual information. And we're starting to understand that maybe that's going up the cortical stack. And this massive processing hardware is built on layers on layers on layers. And it turns out that sometimes it takes in a signal and it overfits it just a little bit, where instead of saying that something is, oh, okay, this is what this blue line is, well, the red line's close enough, And your brain can subtly influence you through these different kinds of biases. So I thought I'd talk about a few of them. And the first one that everyone always brings up is confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing hypotheses. Also, it lets you discount information that doesn't support your existing hypothesis. Of course, the application filled the disk at 3 a.m. It's because the application's people don't know what they're doing. Now, mind you, every day that the application doesn't fill the disk at 3 a.m., that doesn't, that information just gets filtered out. Well, that's not the application's people not being right. And this is kind of a huge source of error for a lot of bugs that when we interpret things. And there's some workarounds for this. So first up, seek disagreement about your point of view. Don't always be, well, okay, don't always have the one theory and just go straight to it, right? Instead, start to think about what are some other theories that might, support this same data. Inspect and question what your questions are, right? Am I actually building a question to just support my existing hypothesis, or am I actually looking at the data? And finally, remove, and this is kind of really useful, remove yourself from the question. So sometimes we ask questions and we're trying to basically confirm what we already know so we feel good about ourselves. Instead, ask the question and feel detached from what the answer is. I spent a month working on this, and if this isn't the way that, if this result isn't exactly what it's supposed to be, I've wasted a month. That biases you in ways to look for the answer that you want, instead of, what's the right thing to do here? Is this the right choice? Second bias is the illusion of validity. This will also sound a little familiar. So in which a person overestimates their ability to interpret and predict or accurately the outcome of analyzing a set of data, in particular when the data is analyzed shows a very consistent pattern. That is when the data tells a story. How many people here have looked at a graph and said, I know exactly the next data point that's going to happen in that graph. I know when that CPU spike's going to happen. We look at graphs and we look at metrics all the time. But a lot of those graphs and a lot of those metrics are very correlated, right? They aren't actually as independent as they would need to be in order to be really confident in that data. So instead, we just start to apply a story. Well, of course, this CPU spiked because of that. Instead of backwardsing it and saying, well, this happened, therefore this CPU spiked. And the effect is even aware when this effect, the illusion of validity, even happens when the person is aware that they know that their data is not correct. So even though you know your metrics aren't right, you're still going to be making that guess that I totally believe that this one line is going to be related to that other line, or it tells a story. And there's some workarounds here, again, for this kind of a bug, where, well, again, inspect the data. Just kind of like with confidence, right? Look at the data from an unbiased point of view, unbiased. And how many of those input and data points are really independent of each other? How many are actually an influence of one or the other? And let's see here. Instead, higher confidence should be merited when a number of highly independent inputs show a consistent pattern. Again, this kind of goes to a lot of the parts about statistics that you can get a lot of unintuitive results. And then, so we've got these two biases. The third bias, overconfidence bias, right? Where now let's see here, you've got a person's subjective confidence in his or her judgments is reliably greater than the objective accuracy of those judgments. Real quick, something that isn't technical. How long here, and you don't have to shout it out, but imagine in your heads, how long do you think the Nile River is? Okay, maybe you've got an answer, maybe you don't. Now, try to guess just a bounding box, right? So if you think the Nile River is 100 miles long, just guess that bounding box 98 to 102, right? So guess within 2%. The Nile River is 4,258 miles long. How many people here were within 2%? I think I might have seen one hand go up. And so the idea is, even when you don't know what the answer is, or even when you know or don't know your confidence intervals, people get that data shockingly wrong. Something like 40%, even when you know the data and even when you know the area of expertise, people overestimate how good they are at estimating. And so there's, again, some workarounds for this, right? Where you can go through, and it's actually worse, by the way. This is another one of those biases that's worse if you're an expert, because, again, you start to think, well, I know the worst case possible scenario for what this could be. I'll go ahead and I'll narrow in my confidence intervals. And instead, you have to learn more about the subject. Again, examine the data without having it lead you to the conclusion. And also, in this one, in overconfidence bias, avoid snap decisions. Again, we make decisions very quickly, and we usually use the lower layers of that pattern matching hardware to just say, oh yeah, this is just like that, therefore it's the same thing, let's just go. Instead of taking the time to actually let the information bubble all the way up and say, oh, okay, this has this subtle thing that I didn't see before. So an interesting thing about all three of those biases is that there is some experimental data that says they're all related. And it kind of sounded that way, right, as I was describing them, where the confidence bias may bias you to look at only a subset of data, that then you tell the story about that data, that then you become more confident. Well, obviously this data supports this story, so therefore it must be right. And what's even worse than having biases that chain into each other is that there is actual, again, information theoretic evidence that entire classes of bias are actually influenced by our neurophysiology in terms of being able to recall memory. And if you have, maybe you've got a hangover, maybe you just haven't had your coffee for the morning, you can actually get influenced by whole classes of bias simply because of the way you're remembering or not remembering something. So a lot of these biases play into a huge aspect of how we go about our daily work, right? And there's another problem, or there's not another problem, but there's another aspect to when we go about working on things in and out with other people. And that's where another big factor kicks in. It's called theory of mind. We all have it. Theory of mind is the idea of where we attribute mental states to oneself and others, and to understand that others have beliefs, desires, and intentions, right? This is the idea that basically I'm going to simulate, or I'm going to have some mental representation of another person inside my head. And to give you an example, again, that's not technical, so there's an ice cream store but near my house. In fact, unfortunately, it's between my house and the grocery store. So every time I go to the grocery store, I basically consult the mental model of my wife to decide if I should pick up some ice cream or not. And it's biased by it's influenced by a whole bunch of factors. When's the last time we both went to the gym? Or either of us having a bad day? When's the last time we had a healthy meal? And I'm quickly interrogating this mental version of my wife inside my head when I could just have texted her. And again, we do this because it's faster. But it has obviously a kind of a couple of problems with it. John Scalzi is a science fiction author, and he kind of maybe captured it best. I am not responsible for the actions of the imaginary version of me you have inside your head. And this is a thing, again, where you can have, oftentimes when you're in maybe a listening class or something like that where you're learning how to communicate and you're told, let the other person speak. Don't prepare your arguments and don't start arguing with the person in your head before they finished speaking. Well, this is part of it, right? That theory of mind is kicking in, and while the other person's talking, you're having an argument with the imaginary version of them. So, again, be aware of it. And how many times here has anybody +1 to a pull request or a code review because you didn't want to get into a flame war with someone, right? Or otherwise basically in conflict. And is that necessarily going to be the case? Maybe they needed to know something. Maybe it was something that they wanted to have feedback on. But instead, you consulted the mental version of them and said, no, not today. So, okay, the hardware has bugs, and I can't trust any of the virtual machines running on top of it. How can I take some actions to try to make this better? And as with everything, we decide, good software engineers, let's pile some frameworks on top of this. We have got buggy software. Let's put more software on top of it. That'll surely not have any bugs. In this case, what I mean by frameworks is things like structured communication efforts. Nonviolent communication is one very popular framework for having stressful conversations or even non-stressful conversations. It's used in schools and other places. Crucial Conversations is a very business-oriented framework. You'll even hear echoes of a lot of what I'm about to say in things like blameless postmortems. And it's because they're all coming from the same place of trying to put together a framework that lets you have conversations without having all of the biases just lop into one big mass. So nonviolent communication is based on the idea, and again, apologies, I'm from Northern California, but I promise this isn't too hippie. The idea that all human beings have capacity for compassion and only resort to behavior that harms others when they don't see or recognize more effective strategies for meeting their needs. Basically what it says, in essence, is that we're all reasonably good people, and that given an ability to get what we want without being horrible, we tend to go that way. We tend to try to find other means. But then when we don't have anything, we can get kind of unpleasant. And so, this nonviolent communication structures it into 4 different parts. Observations, feelings, needs, and requests. And this might sound a little familiar, right? In a postmortem, you have the timeline. And so in observations, you make factual statements, just the facts, right? Of, okay, so this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Feelings. Separately, you can talk about, okay, so this is how, when you ignored our code standards, this is how I felt. I felt that you didn't have respect for the quality of software at our company. You can have a place to have those parts of your conversation be put. And more to the point in things talking about feelings, you can, it's more important to just acknowledge it than it is necessarily to even have to address it. Obviously, you want to try and do both. But if you simply acknowledge that somebody else, so that made you angry, that act of acknowledging it is oftentimes enough to let the other person understand that they've been heard. And again, that kind of pulls everybody out of having theory of mind arguments with each other. And then you obviously can wrap that through with having needs. And okay, this is what I need to have happen, and this is what, this is the need for next time we need a rule in RuboCop that is either more picky or less picky. And requests, these are, again, concrete, actionable, measurable things that you can go through and say, okay, this is, concrete, this is, you're going to write that new RuboCop rule for me, and it's going to be there in a week. So when I went through and one of the first times that after I had read, I think Allspaw talked about blameless postmortems back in like 2011 or something, I was running an organization. I was like, ooh, we need to do a postmortem. I'm going to do a blameless one now. And I was very excited by this idea. Maybe it's because I had been in non-blameless postmortems prior. And so we went through and I was like, okay, I'm going to put this together. I'm going to show how it's done, and this is going to be great. Everybody's going to be so much happier. Even in that case, it's still easy to make mistakes. I put the timeline first in the postmortem document, right? It's observations. And when I put that timeline together, I had an engineer's name in it. And again, I was being factual, right? I thought I was putting in a fact that was important and relevant. And it was actually interesting. I got yelled at more about this postmortem than the actual non-blameless postmortems I'd had previously. I got yelled at because that engineer felt singled out. And so that's the thing where you, again, if I'd had a little bit more time, I'd been thinking about it a little bit more and had a little bit more of a structure and framework in place, I might have had a slightly easier time communicating with my fellow humans. Now I put engineer A in timelines. So to kind of recap and go over what we've been talking about here, so we're all a little too awesome at pattern matching. By default, all of the hardware that's packed into our heads is super, super helpful, and it was amazing a million years ago or however long ago when there were things hunting us, actually physically hunting us. But nowadays, that pattern matching hardware can kind of get in the way. Be aware that you have biases. You're never going to get rid of biases, but there is things like unconscious bias training. This is for both technical issues and interpersonal relationship issues. Consider when to be using that theory of mind, when to be using that little simulated version of somebody inside your head, and when not to. And make sure that you're using it kind of in the appropriate context. And when possible, put together some tooling to help you out and to communicate with other people, so that that you both have a shared understanding of, oh, okay, I'm going to talk about my observations, then you're going to talk about your feelings, then you're going to talk about the needs, and then management will make the requests, I'm sure. No, so. Of course, one thing to kind of keep in mind as you think about and as you learn more about biases, and here's some information. Wikipedia's got a couple, 3 or 4 really awesome pages on it. List of cognitive biases, theory of mind, and nonviolent communication for starters. Thinking Fast and Slow is also a really awesome book. One thing, as you're thinking more and more about bias, and just in general, the fact that we can get tripped up in our own heads so often, is since learning about confirmation bias, I see it everywhere. It's something to just be aware of, is that you're going to run into this for the rest of your life, so just kind of take your time and slowly think about it. Thank you very much. We have time for questions and/or a mic for questions. I think I see a mic in the center of the room. Any questions? Uh-oh. When someone's running to the mic, that's not a good
Oh, I
sign.
don't have questions.
Oh, okay,
Anyone?
I've got lights in my eyes, so I can't quite see. Is it?
No one?
other questions? All right. Awesome.
So I have a question.
Thought I could get
Someone
out.
has to ask the question to get things started. So in your experience, what's been the hardest thing for you as you keep seeing confirmation bias over and over again, for you personally to overcome?
I personally want to immediately leap to the next step. I have this tendency to be impatient. So I'm the stop, look at the data. Am I actually asking the data the right questions? I always want to skip that step and go on to the next thing, which is solving the problem.
So slowing down.
Yep, slowing
To
down.
speed up.
Yep, exactly.
Other questions? Yes.
I think
All right,
it's
let's
because I
see.
like. How do you avoid some of these techniques turning into a club with which we beat people when we don't want to do the next thing. You know, you can throw these biases in front of everything. Well,
Yep.
I think you've got confirmation along. I think that it's estimating in the next data point. I think and you can bring a
Yep.
project to a halt just by challenging with this, because I really don't want to do it anyway.
It's this is the number of times I've seen the list of cognitive biases used as an argument cudgel, like the Wikipedia link. I'm just going to literally throw the entire book at you in internet flame wars. So there is on the internet, you just have to cut your losses and decide some flame wars are worth doing. In person, though, there is still you have to drive the conversation forward. Because, yeah, you can just overanalyze and you can just sit there and say, but that you can call that out. You can actually call that out as, hey, we're taking too much time to do this analysis. We're overanalyzing it. And you can, obviously, it gets very meta where you start to basically say, hey, we're biasing against action or biasing towards action. You know, but you can effectively call it out and say, hey, I'm worried that we're spending too much time on this. And then hopefully move forward with the conversation, or at least look for a next action. You know, Robert's Rules of Order, you know, couple hundred-year-old system has the idea of calling the vote and basically saying, hey, let's move this forward. We've had enough discussion. So, any other questions?
I can probably yell it out loud enough.
Sure.
How do you deal with your team's own confirmation biases of other people's confirmation biases?
They totally don't know what they're doing. No, so I think that there's a couple different things in there, which is again, to repeat the question in case we're doing this on video, it is how do you deal with your own team's confirmation bias about other teams' confirmation biases? In part, it's on you and on your team to examine yourselves, right? You can't change that other team's confirmation biases, whatever they may be, but you can all, as a group, have a conversation to say, we interact with these teams, and these teams have these challenges when we interact with them, but just call that out and then move forward earlier. The second, much more interesting, the second, much more business-related aspect, though, is you can team build together. Right? And I've seen that. I've seen fighting teams. Basically, this team doesn't know what they're doing, and that team is just being too outlandish. Security, you know, security and operations or security and applications teams often tend to be that way. And build it together, right? You can do, obviously, team building exercises, but especially if you've got things like Agile or where you're doing scrums, invite everybody to participate in the process and make sure that everybody can actually see each other instead of demonizing the virtual version that you're all running in your heads. Did I answer your question?
I think we should have time for one more,
Yep.
or maybe two more. Well, I saw a hand back there and I saw a hand there. So we'll go here first, and then we'll go back here a second.
I can't imagine some of the people on my team being comfortable talking about feelings. So how do you overcome that? How do you get people to feel safe or even see the value in that?
Don't use the word feelings is definitely a good first start. I joke. Again, you can use that framework, right, of pulling apart actual, like, down to timestamps and log text, pull away the facts from everything else and from the analysis, right? You can say, okay, I get that you looked at, you know, the Datadog graph of the disk filling at 3 a.m. and that made you very unhappy. Let's pull those two things apart here. When was the disk not full? When was the disk full? What caused the disk to be full? And try to separate that apart, because that analysis part that's where that person then gathers the freedom to say how that made them feel. Even if they don't actually say their feelings, they're still going to impart them.
My question is kind of tied to that one too. Is it necessary to do?
Over here.
Ah, cool.
Sorry.
Hello.
Is it necessary to do? Stop it! They're laughing at
It's a
me.
unicorn causing trouble. So.
To do observation, feeling, needs, requests in that order.
So not necessarily. That's just, again, that was the order I put them in on the slides. And sometimes I've seen them done in parallel where you've got kind of a back and forth on observations and feelings. I've seen also, in crucial conversations, you kind of have the dinosaur hump where you start with facts, and it's a very small and very non-emotionally charged part of the conversation. Then you open it up to the feelings part, and that gets more emotionally charged. Then you close it back down with requests. So it doesn't have to be. It can be done in parallel. But it's what makes the most sense, I think, for the task at hand. So some conversations are going to be like, okay, what are we working on for the next 2 weeks? And some conversations are going to be a little bit more stressful about, why someone is or isn't doing something in terms of maybe their job performance. So.
Great, thank you. Eric,
Thank you.
more questions? Anyone? Great.
All right.
Everyone, big round of applause for Eric.